We are here today with Chris O'Hare and Eilidh Doyle. Chris and Eilidh are now two of our retired Scottish athletes. Eilidh announced her retirement in June of last year, so she's had a little while to get used to the idea. Chris, I think just 2 weeks ago. So we thought it would be a nice idea to get them both together and talk a bit looking back on their careers and also a little bit about making that move into retirement. So thank you, first of all, both of you, very much for joining us.
No worries.
Thanks for having us.
And Chris, you're joining us, I think, from Tulsa, where you live now with your family, with your assistant.
Yes.
And Eilidh, is it your Kinross, is that right?
Yeah, Cook and Devon's just outside Kinross.
Perfect. So we'll cut to it and talk perhaps a little bit about your early days in the sport. And I think it's probably fair to say that they were kind of similar in that both of you were going to your local athletics club, you were doing all the kind of local championships, East District, cross country, that kind of thing. And I think probably you both said as well that for you, what kept you in the sport as much as anything was the social side of things at that age. Is that fair to say, the enjoyment rather than just the sport? Chris, perhaps first of all.
Yeah, definitely. It's always the same kind of crop of people. Obviously, some kids come and some kids go through the years, but there's still people that I talk to fairly regularly today, 15, 16 years later, that I know from racing against as 14, 15-year-olds. So yeah, the social side is huge. And it's when you're young, the kind of sacrifices socially, they seem to stand out a bit more when you can't go to parties with friends or can't do this or that because you've got a race the next day. It makes it a bit easier when you have a social side within the athletics world as well. Makes you feel probably like you're giving up a little bit less and you're just focusing your time on one social grouping instead of your other social grouping. So it's definitely it's huge being around like-minded people.
And Eilidh, I suppose, especially probably for you now, having worked as a PE teacher as well, are there particular things you think that clubs should be looking at and bearing in mind when it comes to trying to make their sessions enjoyable so that kids come back because they're having fun rather than just the focus on competition?
Yeah, I think for me that was the initial draw was the fun element and the social side, and it wasn't necessarily, I was competitive. I wanted to win as much as I could and race, but it was the case of when I first started, I did everything. I tried everything. I took part in everything, and then it wasn't until I was a little bit older I sort of geared towards more sort of middle distance track events, and then I sort of geared towards hurdles. And so I think that was a really good pathway for me, I think, to be able to come in, just try everything, have a lot of fun, meet new friends, and then as you get older, as you get into the more age groups, you start taking it seriously, you start discovering your event. Yes, the fun element is still there, the love for it is still there, but yeah, you're just taking it a bit more seriously. And I think those pathways are really important for keeping athletes in the sport, and keeping them focused as well.
Brilliant. And I think one thing that's striking about both of you, I think we've seen both of you competing in your club vests, even at quite high level. And right the way through your career. Certainly, I think the final of the men's 1500 metres at the British Champs, it's that Edinburgh stripe right across the finishing line is quite a familiar sight. Why is that important to you to do and to keep doing?
Yeah, it's kind of ultimately it's a necessity thing to play by the rules, right? Whilst the sponsors are like, great, it's a major championships and they're national championships that they're not allowed to wear their sponsored vest. It's good for us as athletes because it's a way out of having to wear, for me, my Adidas vest and getting to wear my Edinburgh vest. And it's important for everybody at home getting to watch it, for the 12, 13, 14, 15, all the way up to even 20-year-olds that get to see, well, it seems a bit more realistic when when there's 3 or 4 Edinburgh Athletic Club vests in a British final. It's just easier. It's easier for them to identify that as somebody like them and think, oh, well, I can do that. I can do that too.
And is that something you're aware of, Eilidh, as well? I suppose, especially being back closer to home now, that connection still with Retrieve. And
yeah, definitely. I think it's been visible at that and seeing the vest. I mean, I remember watching Ian Mackey compete when I was first started at Retrieve, and there's that association. You think, oh, he runs for my club. That's the vest I wear. It's the same, the same colours, and I think that's really important. And like Chris says, we don't really get an opportunity to represent our clubs very often, because we are kind of dictated to by sponsorships, or obviously you represent your country, you've got your country's vests on, so very rarely do you get a chance to wear your club colours. So I always think it's really important when you get the opportunity to do it, so everybody back home watching can see, oh, she runs for my club, that's great. And again, they understand that pathway of, well, I joined TV when I was 9. I did whatever everybody else was doing, but yeah, I've been able to go to Olympics and Commonwealth Games, things like that. And I think, yeah, having that visual representation there is really important.
Lovely. And then moving sort of on through your careers, obviously there's a point where each of you has taken quite individual paths into the sport. Chris, you obviously going off to America and to university in Tulsa, and Eilidh staying in the UK and then moving down to Bath to train with Malcolm Arnold. Tell us a little bit about what fed into those decisions. So Chris, what was it that took you to the States in terms of your athletics career?
Yeah, a lot of different things. I never enjoyed school. It was a place I had to be, and so I never kind of thought I would go to university. And then when I was kind of presented that opportunity to do it as well as run and get that paid for and get the life experience of going to the US and kind of, for lack of a less cheesy term, live the American dream. It was an opportunity that was presented to me when I wasn't winning British championships, and I was kind of being somewhat ignored by British athletics. So it was like, well, this is, these people are offering me what seemed at the time everything. Great facilities, great competition, and I had the benefit of the likes of Chris Gosson and Darren Gosson, who I trained with under Dave Campbell in Edinburgh, who had gone out to the US before me and kind of lived it and had that. And Chris Gosson was still there competing when I went out as well, so I could see what they were doing and how valuable it was to them. And it really wasn't that big of a decision whether I was going to go or not. It was just where I was going to go. Great.
And then for you, Eilidh, initially it was the move into teacher training and being in Edinburgh and sort of having a student life there. And then in due course, obviously, moving down to Bath.
Yeah, I'd always kind of had the plan that I'd always wanted to get a degree and get a sort of qualification under my belt. And I always thought teaching was a really great opportunity because it's one of those degrees where you're pretty much guaranteed a job at the end of it, of whether it's a full-time teacher or doing supply and things like that. So I always kind of thought that's the path I want to go down. I want to try and get that and do the athletics on the side. And then once I'd kind of graduated, done my probation year, I was starting to really get success. I was starting to make, teams and I thought, right, if I really want to give this a serious shot, I need to be with the best in the country. And that at the time was Malcolm. He had a really great hurdle squad down there. And for me, I kind of had that in the back of my mind for a couple of years. So I tried to save as much money as I could when I was teaching to then be able to go full time, to then move down there and train with him. So I kind of had a bit of a long-term plan with that. And probably I probably moved in a bit too late in terms of, I moved down there in 2011 ahead of London 2012. And it wasn't enough time at that point to kind of establish a relationship and each of us to get the best out of each other. But then I stayed there for almost, almost 8 years. I think I was down there and worked with Malcolm for so long. It really became the best place for me. I really developed a lot there. And then after working with Malcolm, he then allowed Brian to come on board and develop Brian as a coach. So yeah, I think had I not moved to Bath and done that, I think my career would have been very, very different. You know, I don't think I would have had the success. I might have had the longevity either of my career.
Grand. And then in terms of looking at the span of both your careers, I mean, we could spend a whole day talking about so much that you've both achieved, but let's pick out perhaps a few points and particularly places where you intersected. Let's talk about the European Champs in Zurich in 2014, which was a great event for you both. You both came home with medals. Chris, there was a bronze in the 1500, and Eilidh, champion at 400 metre hurdles. What are your memories of that trip when you look back now? Is it solely the race? Is it the atmosphere? Or the team? Tell us what you remember. Eilidh, first of all.
Stress, exhaustion. That whole championship for me was just terrifying. I think coming off the back of the Commonwealth Games and going to the Europeans ranked as number one, I just kind of was in a process at that Europeans. It was just like, do the next race, do the next race, do the next race, you know, just run, execute your race, don't think about winning, don't think about medals, don't think about anything like that. But to actually win it it's my best moment. I think it's probably my best performance, not my fastest performance, but I think it's definitely my best performance of my career and probably my favourite medal. But I'm not really an emotional, well, I say I'm not really an emotional person. I think I've changed since my son came along. But at that time, I wasn't really an emotional person. And even standing on the podium when I won that, I burst into tears. And I think it was just sheer exhaustion that, oh, it's over. Thank goodness I've done it. You know, Commonwealths have been, Europeans have been, I've got medals and I've done what I should have, you know, what I hoped I would achieve. So when I think back specifically to the champs, I just think, oh, that was a hard time, but I can now look back and think of the race and think, yeah, it was hard, but yeah, it was probably one of my best performances. So it's definitely my favorite medal.
Brilliant. And how about you, Chris? How did that fit into the sort of wider landscape of what you were doing at the time and that year?
Yeah, I didn't have a clue what I was doing in Zurich. So I had kind of gone pro at the start of 2014. And so we kind of had a world indoors, didn't really go very well, was a lot to take on. Commonwealth Games was just a kind of a whirlwind of emotions. It being a home games, it's just bizarre. It's a lot, you know. I wasn't in London for 2012, and so this was kind of the first time witnessing that home support. And then, yeah, so coming off the back of Commonwealths, and then I proposed to my wife just after Commonwealth. So it was a whirlwind of a 2 weeks. And so I remember kind of getting to Zurich and thinking, I'm really tired. But the heat went well, and the final was just a riot. People falling down all over the place. It was carnage, a typical 1500 meter fashion, but this seems to be even more chaotic than normal. And yeah, I mean, just a mad dash down the home straight, ended up in third. I didn't really know what to do. And if I remember correctly, that's when I saw Eilidh and we had a big hug. And it was, you know, you're kind of put in this strange Colosseum type environment where when you've got a job to do, you're running your race, you get to the start line, you know, you've got this job to do, you do it, but then once you've crossed the finish line, nobody tells you what to do next. So I was like, I didn't go do a lap of honor. I was just like, I don't really know what to do. Nobody was telling me, hey, go run that way. Somebody threw me a flag and I was like, all right, my mom and dad are over there, so I'm just going to go and see them. So yeah, total rookie environment. I had no idea what I was doing, but having Eilidh there was pretty special because it's, you know, like I say, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. And so you feel kind of on an island with everybody everybody's in the stands. And so to have somebody that you know and kind of looked up to for a while was pretty cool. And then, yeah, I don't really remember a whole lot about it.
Right. Eilidh, you didn't lean in and say, right, go that way now.
No, we just come out for the 4x4 final, so I probably should have been a bit more focused on that, but we'd literally just seen the last 100 metres of so we hadn't seen the rest of the race, so we were obviously all screaming at the side sort of thing, cheering, which is always quite nice in the 4x4 where you get to see some of the medals getting won. So yeah, I was just over the moon, so I just ran up because I was on the first leg, so I just ran out and gave you a hug, and then I was like, I need to actually set up my blocks and get ready for my race now. So, but yeah, it's nice. It's really nice when you can share those moments, you know, because we're all in our own training groups, we're all in our own areas of the world, you know, and we're all got our own events. So very rarely you do get to come together. I'm lucky enough that I do get to do it in the relay, but yeah, it's nice when you can have a little moment and share that with somebody else, you know, especially when you know, you're really happy that they've been successful as well.
I do remember having to wear, I'm not sure whose trousers they were, but I was, you know, when you're packing, and the media team with British Athletics, I always say, everybody pack your presentation gear, because you never know what happened. I'm like, I don't need my presentation gear. Like, be great if I'm on the podium, but I'm not going. I didn't want to jinx it, so I didn't bring my presentation gear. So I was wearing one of the 4x4 girls' presentation trousers on the podium to get my medal. So thankfully I'm not a big guy, or it would have looked even worse, but they were tight in all the wrong places.
Well, Matt Hudson-Smith had my jumper on when the 4x4 men won their medal, because he didn't bring his either. So he's actually, they've all got their sleeves rolled up, because I think mine came to about there on Matt Hudson.
Right.
So if you wonder why the 4x4 men in Zurich have got their sleeves rolled up, that's why, because he's wearing my
So everyone went home with someone else's piece of kit.
Someone else's gear on. Yeah.
It is a horrible thing though, taking your kit, because you don't want to jinx anything. I did it. Yeah. I've done it a few times where I've had to send somebody back because you just don't want to tempt any sort of fate, you know, of winning a medal. You just think, no, I'll just go and compete, and if it happens, it happens. Someone can go and find the kit for me.
Yeah, better that way around.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, one thing that really stands out looking over the length of both your careers is the incredible consistency. Chris, I think I'm right in saying you had 10 years of running sub-4 in the mile, 25 times consecutively. Eilidh, you've medalled at international level, I think, every year from 2013 to 2019, often more than once in those years. What is the secret of managing that kind of level of consistent performance over such a long period of time?
I think that's one of the things I'm probably most proud of, I think, of my career is just the consistency. And I think there's a lot of things. It's the surroundings that you've got, your environment, your team. It's also a bit of luck. You know, I've been very lucky in my career that I've not really had injuries. You know, I only had a couple at the latter end of my career. And I think if you can put back-to-back winters of good solid training, and if you can get just that robustness and that training in your legs, it can be so beneficial, you know. And towards the latter part of my career, I got a couple of niggles, and I must admit it threw me, because I never really experienced gaps in training and stuff like that. So I must admit I've been very fortunate in my career that I've been solid with training. But again, a lot of that's down to the coaches that I've had, the support I've had, physios, soft tissue therapists, being able to have all that there that have kept me in one piece. But definitely, I think just back-to-back winter sessions where you've not had any niggles, that you've been able to put in really good solid training sessions.
And how about you, Chris, especially in terms of keeping up that kind of streak in a particular event? Does that become motivating or challenging when you know, right, I've done this for so long?
Yeah, honestly, if you'd posed that as a quiz question, I wouldn't have been able to tell you how many times I've broken 4 and stuff like that. And I think that's probably most athletes. It's not really focusing on what we've done as opposed to what we're trying to achieve. And what you've done doesn't matter. Just because you've done something before, it doesn't, you step on the line of a mile, just because you've broken it however many times before, it doesn't make it, nobody's going to give it to you. So yeah, I wouldn't have been able to tell you those statistics. But yeah, it's fun now that I'm finished to be able to look back at it and kind of get to enjoy it on this side of things.
Sorry, another high point probably for both of you is that you've both had the experience of setting Scottish records at various points. Chris, you took down the 1500 metre record in 2017. I think that was the first time it had been broken in 38 years, which then set it up to be, I think you then broke it again, and obviously paving the way for Jake and Josh after that. And you still have the indoor mile record that you set in New York in 2016. Is that something that was a particular target that you were particularly pleased to get?
Absolutely. Yeah. I never really went into races with the goal of breaking records, simply because I was more interested in trying to win the race as opposed to getting a time, and more often than not, the time would follow. I'm very proud to kind of to be on those lists, and one thing I'm absolutely positive of is that my mile record won't stand past this indoor season, which is actually great. I mean, people ask me, is it hard to see records go, and ultimately it's not. That's kind of the idea. You break it, the 1500 meter record after however many years, and that's kind of the way it goes. I mean, you break it, and then the guys who are younger than you go, oh, cool, yeah, I can do that too. That's great, and then they go and do it, which is great. It would be unless you're just running so fast that you're putting a record out of touch. It's going to happen. It's going to happen eventually, and I'm almost happy and pleased that I know the guys that are breaking it after me, and that it was me that they were able to see do it and get the motivation or the kind of just the knowledge that they can do it, because Chris did it.
And is that similar for you, Eilidh, in terms of you had the 400 metre indoor record in 2013, and then the hurdles record outdoors in Birmingham, and then again in Monaco in 2016, I think, which is still the current record. Is it very much the case that you're really focusing on winning that individual race, and if you get the record, that's a bonus? Or is that something that you're aware of in your sort of peripheral vision? You're homing in on it.
Yeah, no, I'm the exact same as Chris in this. I've never gone into a race thinking about any sort of record. I've never really gone into a race thinking about a PB or anything. I've literally, the races that I've gone into that have been my better races and I've had more success in is the ones I've just gone in there and been like, right, I'm going to execute this race plan. This is how I'm going to run this race. And you ultimately, if you execute it right, the times will come, the position will come, and things like that. And for me, it's the nice bonus at the end of it, where you can cross the line and say, right, that was a great performance. So actually, that was what I ran. That's a new Scottish record, brilliant. But it's like Chris said, these records, they're there to be broken, so they don't last forever. But your performances and your memories and your medals, they're the things you can always have and always, keep. And it's just nice to see the event develop as well. So you are happy when your records get broken because you're wanting the event to get better. You're wanting it to be competitive. I would like my hurdles record to last long though. I think the 400 indoor one probably won't, but I've hurdles is my very, it's my baby, it's my soft spot. So I would like that to last a bit longer.
Mixed feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to talk about the flip side a little bit as well. Anyone who's in sport for any length of time deals with these highs, the podium moments, the records, but also there's always some kind of disappointment, and you have to learn how to deal with that. I know, Chris, you've talked before about the period right after Berlin 2018 when you went in feeling really strong and thinking that you were a good chance of a medal, and it was just not a good final for you. How did you learn to deal with disappointment over the years, and who are the people that help you do that as well?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of the like you say, the flip side of it all is and hopefully kind of speaking about the hard times will help the next generation of athletes say, well, whilst I got motivation from the times that these athletes did this, but I also understand that when those athletes had bad times, it's not the end of the world. Berlin in 2018 does stick out as probably the longest and the hardest it's been to get over the disappointment. I went in, I think ranked second or third on time, and was feeling great all season. It was actually the first season that I'd had in pretty much my whole career that wasn't coming into a major championship all taped up and struggling with an injury or 7 or 8 all at the same time. And so it just felt great. And then as kind of sod's law would dictate, it didn't go to plan. And so it took me a long time to get over that. Obviously, you know, the usual suspects, family and support team were instrumental in kind of getting me through that. And you know, it's funny. I shared a hotel room with Neil Gourley at European Indoors, which was only probably 6 months after that. And he had qualified for the final, looked set to win a medal really, and then got sick and didn't end up running in the final. And I remember having a conversation with him about how kind of disappointed he was. And it was like, look, I mean, I've won a medal here. You went home having not been able to run in the final, and we're going to step out of this hotel, and nobody's going to know who we are. Nobody's going to care. I'm going to get on a flight back to America, and my medal's going to be in my bag, but nobody's really going to care that much. So we do, as athletes, because it is our whole world, we do often get caught up in thinking it's everybody's whole world, when in all actuality, it's a very select group of people that are interested in the sport. And it moves on whether you're there moving with it or not. And that's a kind of helpful realization that when, for instance, in Berlin, when it didn't go to plan, you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, get back to training, and then get after it at the next given opportunity, which was Glasgow indoors for me.
And I mean, Eilidh, you said earlier that at least until your son came along, you were never particularly emotional about the sort of the highs and lows. But did that apply to the lows as well as the highs? Did you find you were reasonably steady at picking yourself up after disappointment, or were there some that sort of stick out that were harder to get over than others?
Yeah, there were some that stuck. It's funny, 2018 Berlin for me stuck out as well, because I'd had a funny season because I'd been injured, and then I'd got to Berlin not really expecting a massive amount, and ran my heat and absolutely smashed it, and went into the final kind of ranked, I think, second, and all of a sudden went from not potentially being there to actually I could go here and win a medal, and my mindset totally changed in that final. And I thought, I'm going to go out here and smash it, and I mucked up and hit hurdle and finished 8th, you know, and I'd never really, like I say, one of my proudest achievements is my consistency, and I very rarely make big mistakes and big champs. So that did hit me hard. It was. I was like, what the hell just happened there? But like Chris says, it's about putting everything into perspective. It's about having the right people around you, the right conversations afterwards. And you know, I remember going back to the warm-up area, and I felt like I had some sort of like disease, because nobody wanted to come near me. Like nobody didn't know what to say to me, you know. And Malcolm was actually there. He'd gone out there to coach Andrew Posey, and Brian was obviously there. And at that point, Brian just came up to me, and he was just like, you know, hard lines. And it was, I needed that there. I needed not so much maybe my coach there, but I needed my husband there to just be able to just say the right thing to me. And I think, yeah, if you've got somebody there who could just pick you up at the end of a race and say the right thing to you, and that'll have been massive for Neil, obviously, having Chris there. And again, I sometimes just think, right, what would I say to somebody else if they were in my position, you know? And I think if you can sometimes take yourself out of it, then the emotion can sometimes come out of it. Because right after my race, my roommate Shalena, she'd ran and not had a great race either. So I made sure I went right up to her, you know, and was the first person there for her after her race. And yeah, I think it is. It's, you have disappointments, but again, the disappointments, you as long as you learn something from them, then they're the ones that make the highs even better, you know. So it's like, you know, if you don't have those low moments, then the highs aren't as great as they are. So yeah, you have to have that balance.
It's maybe a nice segue into the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is that both of you became parents towards the end of your careers, and I'm curious how that changed your kind of orientation towards athletics, in partly just practically in terms of having the time and the energy to train, but also I'm guessing it also maybe puts things in a different perspective, changes your sense of identity and your priorities slightly. Was that something, Eilidh, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's ultimately part of the reason I did retire in the end, you know, because part of my part of my love for the sport was being able to go away and compete. And I always said, whenever I went to a race, you know, when I'm on the, if I was ever kind of nervous for a race, I always said to myself, well, where would you rather be in the world right now? Would you rather be on this start line racing, or would you rather be somewhere else? And the answer was always like, well, I'd rather be here on this start line. And then with everything that kind of happened, having Campbell and then the pandemic hitting, it kind of skewed everything a little bit. My perspective kind of changed. All of a sudden, it wasn't just about me, you know, being able to do everything I wanted to do. And ultimately, when it came to the Olympics being in 2021, I did say to myself, where would I rather be just now? Would I rather be out there competing, probably not to the best of my ability that I have done in previous Olympics, or would I rather be at home? And the answer was, I'd rather be at home with my son, you know. And so it really changed my perspective. But don't get me wrong, up until sort of 2021, 2020, you know, training and having him there at the track with me and having somebody else there, it just made me much more chilled out and lighter, you know, because it was like, yes, athletics is a big part of my life and it means so much to me, but actually there's so much more to the world than athletics, you know. So I could actually be far more relaxed about my approach to training, my approach to racing, all that sort of stuff. So although I never actually competed after he came along, it definitely allowed me to understand why I do the sport, and then ultimately why I wasn't going to do it anymore.
Chris, I think you've probably had more years of competing and being a parent and having that overlap. How did things change for you once you become a dad?
Yeah, a lot. It's, you know, athletes kind of inherently, they have to be very selfish. I've always kind of tried not to be, and how I do things. But, you know, if you think about a setup for an athlete or a group, everybody around the athlete is the athlete, and everything around it is to help propel this athlete forward. So the athlete's the most important part. We had Ronan when I was 25, so kind of right in the middle of my professional career. And yeah, I think for me it was, you know, I always tried to be as kind of pliable as possible. But it does kind of think, you know, but also if you're jet lagged and you can't sleep the night before a race, you get wound up and you think, oh man, I can't sleep, I'm going to race terribly, my whole world's going to fall apart. And once you've had literally no sleep, and with a child, and then you wake up and you go, yeah, you just have to get on with it. Then it makes it a bit easier. Kind of puts it into perspective a little bit. And also when you have a bad race and you FaceTime, you know, I would have a bad race, for instance, in Berlin, FaceTime my wife, and she's like, oh, you know, I'm really sorry. She ultimately doesn't really know what to say, because as athletes, we don't even really know what we're going to hear. And then, you know, you get to talk to a 2-year-old, and he's like, what's the problem? Nothing. This doesn't matter. Like, whatever you're doing, stop whatever you're doing, come home and let's pick golf balls together. Like, whatever it's a really good reminder that it's just not that important compared to, you know, them. And they see the world almost in a much better light. And so, yeah, granted, being a dad is a hell of a lot easier than being a mum. So it's not even close. So, you know, whilst it's tiring and it's difficult, it's not even close to what female athletes go through, that the whole process and trying to return to the sport. But it was played a big part in my retirement decision as well, because I had hip surgery at the end of 2020, and just talking with my coach, and he was like, yeah, I mean, if you want to get back to that level and compete with Josh and Jake and Neil and all the other Brits who are progressing the 1500 meters forward at a hell of a clip, then you're going to have to commit to it just like you did when you were 20, 21, 22, 23. And I was like, yeah, I just don't want to. I don't want to go away for a training camp for 2 months and then away for another 2 months to race. I just wasn't willing to do it. I wasn't prepared to leave them for that long. And Ronan is 5. And so he knows, he's like, oh, you're going to work all day. So he knows, he gets the concept of time, he understands it, and so when you're gone for months at a time, it's just not. I wasn't prepared to kind of take that from him at that point.
And you've both mentioned there Tokyo, which, I mean, it sounds like even if Tokyo hadn't shifted back a year, you were probably both already at the point where it was maybe not on your calendars. You were starting to think about winding down. I'm curious how it felt then actually watching it. I mean, Eilidh, you were already retired at that point. Chris, I'm guessing you kind of pretty much knew you were probably heading in that direction. And there you were watching your clubmate Josh medaling in the 1500 meters. Was that bittersweet watching that, or were you at the point then you're just like, absolutely take it forward? Or was it like Eilidh said, you knew you were in the right place?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't. It was just sweet. It wasn't really bittersweet at all. Having grown up with Josh, I've always had a kind of a soft spot for Josh and wanted him to succeed. And like a meerkat in the background there. And so yeah, it was just sweet. It was, I mean, I think I was probably screaming at the TV just as loud as his parents were. Granted, at that point, I knew, I mean, that this is it for me. I'm not, I won't have to compete against him in the future. But no, I mean, I think whether it was Josh or Jake or really any of the British 1500 meter guys that I've spent a lot of time with over the last few years, I would have been happy. But certainly to see Josh achieve something that I had always wanted to, but never did, was amazing. So yeah, just sweet really, which was nice. It was some, maybe a little bit surprising that it wasn't bittersweet. But then that was again, just kind of showed that I was happy in my decision making process, and I was happy that I'd made the right decision. If it had been very bittersweet, then maybe I would have been thinking, oh, maybe I've made the wrong decision retiring here.
And how about you, Eilidh, watching, having been in London and Rio then, and watching this one from a long way away? How did that feel?
Yeah, well, that was the thing. I'd already obviously announced my retirement at that point, but I think I was lucky as well because I had a nice transition out of the sport because I got pregnant first. So my first experience of watching a champs and not being there was the World Champs in Doha in 2019, because I was quite heavily pregnant there. And I remember sitting at home watching that and not missing out being there, just really enjoying watching it as a fan, just being kind of really engulfed in it all as a fan. And I remember that was probably a little bit of a clue to me that I was coming towards the end of my career. And then obviously when I had Campbell, 2020 was the challenge. It was like, well, let's get back, let's use that as a motivation to get back, but deep down probably knowing that actually my heart is not in it anymore. And that was the thing. I felt, because obviously it didn't happen until 2021, I felt very removed from the sport already at that stage. So again, I could just watch it as a fan, and my event, has moved on quite drastically. So there was very few athletes as well in my event that I competed against. There was a handful of them, but the top girls there, Bar Mohammed, are relatively young, who have not actually raced. So yeah, it just felt really nice for me to sit back and be like, oh, I can just really enjoy this as a fan, and then obviously you've got the only thing I probably would say I missed out on was you just don't have those sort of like behind the scenes details, and more so in the 4x4 when there's all the drama over selection and things like that. I felt a bit, I wonder what's going on there. But really, again, it was a confirmation that I made the right choice, that I could actually just sit back and enjoy watching it, and there was no part of me that was thinking, I wish I was there, I wish I was competing.
Yeah. Brilliant. But let's just rewind a little bit, actually. We've almost skipped over there talking about Glasgow 2019, the European Indoors, which was another great championships for both of you. Both came away with silver medals, Chris in the 3,000 metres and Eilidh in the relay. I'm curious, well, obviously just for your reflections on that, and also how that then maybe played into the retirement decision, in terms of, does it make it harder or easier when you've had a brilliant international like that? Do you come away, or maybe look back a few months down the line and think, I've really finished on a high. If I go out now, that'll be all right? Or does that make you think, maybe I should carry on? This is brilliant, I want to do this again. Chris, tell us about your memories of that and how it affected you.
Yeah, I certainly in Glasgow in 2019, I had no kind of desire to hang up the spikes, no need to, no real reason to, and so Glasgow 2019 was really at the building blocks for Doha outdoors, which ultimately didn't transpire. I had a pretty tricky time with injury that summer, and then and my second son was born that summer as well, which was always a wrench in the works. But yeah, I mean, it was, which I think is good, because I was able to just enjoy it being in the moment, as opposed to thinking I'm enjoying this because it's the last time I'm ever going to get to do it. So, there's always this kind of two sides to that coin. But I'm thankful that I was able to live in that moment and enjoy it in that moment, and get to, I'm really happy that grandparents and my parents and siblings and everybody was able to be there and watch it, because a lot of people hadn't ever been able to see me live. And so, thankfully, it's almost kind of two bookends, really. One with Glasgow in 2014 being my kind of first major championship, and then getting to kind of finish it up with an indoors in Glasgow as well was in hindsight pretty special. I didn't really think about it at the time.
And Eilidh, again, just your memories of that time, and then how that played into sort of the next year or so.
Yeah, well, again, that was probably a little trigger for me to that I knew I was kind of coming towards the end of my career, because I think probably going back to 2018 and coming back from the Gold Coast, that had been such a big champs, and I was quite physically tired after it. And I remember thinking at that point, I could quite happily retire now. And I think as soon as you kind of say that word in your head, it's kind of there. But there's always the lure of the next competition, and obviously knowing that it was going to be another champs in Glasgow, it was like, well, I'll need to go to that and try and compete there. And I didn't have a very good individual there. I didn't make the final. And I remember going back to 2017 European Indoors in Belgrade, and I didn't make the final of the 400. And I remember being absolutely devastated. I remember being, just absolutely gutted. And in Glasgow, I wasn't really that gutted. I was like, oh, that was hard lines, but, it's just kind of what happens. And I think that was, again, sort of telling me, maybe your heart's not quite in it anymore. But because I actually went out when we ran the relay, I ran about, a second and a half quicker than my individual, just because it was being a part of a relay. So I was in better shape than what my individual had shown. And I think it was just because my heart wasn't really in it. And I think coming from Glasgow, that was my first kind of sense of, I don't really know how I'm feeling about athletics just now. And then that was when we decided to try for a baby sort of thing. So yeah, Glasgow was kind of information to me to say something's not quite the same here. But then I remember when I was seriously thinking about retiring, and I sort of went back and I thought, what would officially have been my last race then? And it was like, oh, well, my last race would have been crossing the line, for the 4x4 girls, getting through the anchor leg and winning a medal in front of a home crowd. And I thought, well, there you go. You can't ask any more than that. That's actually a really nice way to finish it. So yeah, it was kind of mixed feelings from that. It made me stay on probably a bit longer than maybe I should have. I don't know, but it did add another medal, to the collection, and it allowed me to go and compete in front of a home crowd again. So, yeah, special memories there for different reasons, really.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think for everyone who was watching it as well, that was a great competition. And just in terms of where you're at now, I'm curious, perhaps just briefly, what you do now in terms of your sort of training or athletics activity. I'm guessing it's been part of your life, your whole life. You don't just suddenly stop, but it must be very different when you no longer have those big goals, big championships every summer that you're working towards. How do you keep that motivation? And I suppose, Eilidh, any advice for Chris? You're 6 months further down the line and the retirement.
Yeah, well, I'm 6 months further down and I'm 6 months pregnant as well, so my level of activity is pretty dire just now. So I won't be giving any advice of keeping fit in terms of an endurance athlete. But no, I think one of the easiest things for me was, like I say, I had a bit of a transition out of the sport. I was able to kind of step away from it and still have funding, financially to sort of really think about my choices and stuff like that. I think that's one of the hardest things is stopping being an athlete and seeing yourself as, oh, I'm not an athlete anymore. You know, when you've still got all the mentality, you've still got all the attributes of being an athlete, but technically you're not an athlete anymore. And I think the most important thing is understanding who you are as a person. You know, not identifying you know, being Eilidh the athlete, that's who I am. It's like, no, I'm Eilidh, I am an athlete, I was an athlete, but I'm also all these other things as well. And this is all the skills that I've learned through being an athlete, I can now, you know, channel in different areas and things like that. And I think that's really important, to be able to have that transition. You see a lot of athletes when they retire, all of a sudden they just don't know what to do. You know, they don't know who they are, all these kind of things. And I think if you can have a nice grounded understanding, also have the right people around you, also have an understanding of what you want to do as well, you know, because you know, again, I was lucky enough that I was on funding and then I retired, so I got a transition of 3 months of funding, so I could then use that. I mean, again, it's not a massive amount of time to discover what you want to do, but I again had that whole period where I was pregnant, where I went and explored different avenues. So I find myself very fortunate that I had those opportunities to go and explore different areas. You know, Chris has obviously, you know, got his job now as well, and I think that's massive. I think, you know, you can't just be like, I'm done, and then not have any idea what you want to do, because it can be quite difficult that way. But yeah, it's been relatively straightforward for me, which I'm really grateful that it has been. And I think the biggest thing I'm most grateful for was I got to choose when I retired. You know, it wasn't like it was taken out of my hands, you know, via injuries or anything like that. So yeah, it's been a nice kind of process for me.
Yeah, and likewise, Chris, I mean, I guess as Eilidh says, we're seeing you in the office here. You obviously, there is another career that you're moving into, so that presumably has been a big help for you in terms of leaving the athletics career behind.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think, you know, Eilidh kind of hit the nail on the head there with identity, and that's something that I try to talk to as many young athletes as possible about, is being kind of as multifaceted as possible. Don't just be an athlete, be all the different things that you're interested in as well. You know, obviously, when you sink that much time into something, that kind of becomes, your identity is rooted in that, but you need to kind of have some other things as well. And so towards the end of my career, I had kind of, it seemed more apparent that I was missing things, missing going skiing with family, doing stuff like that, going mountain biking, stuff that you don't do for fear of injury. And so all of those things were kind of like, yeah, I mean, I'd like to do that more frequently. I'd like to do this and that. So when I did retire, I was like, okay, great. Like, now I don't have to go and run. I can fill my time with other things. Not that I have a whole lot of time with 3 kids, but it kind of opened up some doors. It felt like I was closing one door on my running career, but being able to open 4 or 5 more, as opposed to kind of closing it behind you and standing there in darkness, not knowing what you're going to do. So didn't have any real kind of emotional struggle with retiring until I posted made my retirement kind of public, and then you see everybody's lovely messages and reaching out, and people who you don't think about, people who you don't know at all, reaching out to say how your career's impacted them, and that's pretty special. And so hugely thankful for that. But yeah, thankfully as well, it wasn't too difficult of a decision.
Lovely. And I suppose one last thing that it would be nice to hear your reflections on is that, certainly as someone who's been watching the sport over the span of your careers, is that it feels as if you have been part, and probably at the vanguard of, a very significant generation of Scottish athletes. All the people who are perhaps in the early stages of their career around the time of London 2012, and then especially all those people that were part of Team Scotland for Glasgow 2014 have, without a doubt, I mean, absolutely raised the bar in so many different areas of the sport. And I feel, you know, there's quite a sense of this cohort moving through, and the way that that's affected perhaps the grassroots of the sport as well, and lifts everyone up. Is that something that you've been aware of as part of your experience going through this past sort of 10 or so years in the sport? Chris, perhaps first of all.
Not at first, certainly, but over the last kind of couple of years, yeah, I would say so. And it's great to be a part of. And it also makes walking away from it a bit easier when you know you had a bit more of a purpose than just your own personal gain. It does feel quite special to be part of something moving forward. And so yeah, I mean, even, quite close, you can, with specifically Jake and Josh being both Edinburgh guys as well, hopefully, and then I've spoken to them about it. It's like, we got to see you do stuff that we hadn't seen anybody else do before, and so that helps boost it. And then they're taking it on another level, because there's going to be people watching Josh saying, well, we've never seen a British guy that we know win an Olympic medal, so now we can go and do it. So we'll be having this conversation with Josh, and hopefully a long time from now, and there will be a whole generation following him that are clipping at his heels. And so, yeah, it's special to be part of something a bit more than just you.
And Eilidh, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I think it's hard to appreciate it when you're in it, because you're in it for for yourself. You're targeting championships, and you probably don't appreciate the success that's coming along with it. But it's nice now to be able to sit back and reflect and look back at your first championships. Who was there? Who kept going? Who had success? I mean, like you say, kind of going back to 2014. I remember sharing with Laura there, and her having this, really upsetting experience, getting tripped and things like that. And then, being invested in her journey as well, because you're on teams together, you're seeing each other on the circuit and stuff like that. And then being able to not be part of it anymore, and then to watch her, win an Olympic medal. It's just, it's really nice to be able to see everybody's kind of journey and how it's progressed and have been part of it on the way, sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, I just see myself as being very fortunate, that within my career, there was so many home championships, I think, having London, having Glasgow, having the world champs in London, and having home, the indoors in Glasgow. And I think at the time you don't really appreciate that. And it's only when you stop and you can actually sit back and reflect, you can be like, wow, there's so many good things that happened. And the sport is in such a good place now. It's just, it's also, like Chris said, it's easier to step away, because you're stepping away going, great, the sport's in a good place. I can retire happy.
Brilliant. Well, that sounds like the perfect note to end it on. So thank you very much, both of you, for joining us, and for all the enjoyment that you've given us over the years, all those of us that have been following your careers and your races, and enjoy retirement.
Thank you.
Thank you.